Pode. Ok, Aquiles.
Okay?
Isabela?
Sim.
Ok, tudo certo.
Ok.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Zoom na Cartografia. Is the broadcast okay? Can you hear me well? Joyce,
Yes.
could you please check if the broadcast on YouTube is okay, please? Joyce is our student. She's helping us today with the technical part.
Yes, Achilles, we're okay everywhere. We're live.
Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for the linguistics community in Brazil to be launching this series of colloquia called Zoom na Cartografia, which is Portuguese for cartography, zoomed in. I'm Aquiles Tescari Neto from the University of Campinas, Unicamp, where I also lead the Cartographic Syntax Laboratory, La Casa. Also here today is my colleague, Dr. Sandra Quaresmin, from the Federal University of Santa Catarina. She is one of the leaders of the NAG research group. The NAG is the Center for Grammatical Studies, and they are the ones who are broadcasting this meeting to a larger audience right now. Together, we are pleased to be making these meetings happen live. After the stream's over, a recording will be available for viewing on YouTube, right here on this channel. So, thank you very much for being here with us. Our guest today is Professor Guglielmo Cinque, who is an emeritus professor at the University Ca' Foscari in Venice. Of course, Guglielmo needs no introduction. He will have an hour to give his conference, which is entitled Cartography and Linear Order. After that, we will have some time for discussion, so please, if you have any questions, just click on the link we are putting on the YouTube chat. You will be directed to a Google Docs page where you can submit your questions. Please leave your full name, country, and institution. And now, Professor Cinque, welcome to Zoom na Cartografia. The floor is yours. Please begin.
Thank you very much, Achilles. I'm very glad to be able to talk to you and see you, and it's been a long time since we met. So, to start, an intuition of traditional grammar with its notion of subject, predicate, complement, is that certain sequences of words make up a closer unit than other sequences. So, for example, in 1a, the sequence the boy, the subject, or kick the ball, the predicate, or the ball, the object, make a stronger, constituent than other sequences like a boy kicked or kicked the. I mean, this is a very clear and simple case. The problem is that apart from such simple cases, we have no direct access to the correct constituency of the sentence and other phrases. So as soon as we look at more complex sentences or cases, like, for example, the phrase in 1b, the 417-meter tall twin towers, our intuition kind of vacillate, and often they fail in complex cases. So we have to resort to constituency tests that have been developed by structuralist and generative approaches, let's say substitution, ellipsis, coordination, movement. Now, here in this talk, I would like to discuss a novel type of evidence to determine the finer-grained constituency of some phrases with a particular reference to the nominal domain. And this is based on a particular hypothesis concerning cross-linguistic word order variation. Now, the cartography project is, as you know, is particularly concerned with determining or reconstructing the finer grained hierarchy at the basis of the clause and of its major phrases, which has to be discovered despite the enormous variation that there is in word order, in cross-linguistic word order. Now, this is an empirical project, although it also is based on a number of theoretical tenets. And one of the most important, or the first and most important tenets is that there is a universal hierarchy of structure for the clause and its phrases common to all languages as part of our language faculty. Now, the hypothesis I was hinting at earlier is that the canonical orders of the world's languages can all be derived from a unique hierarchy through movement in one of the possible ways that movement can take place. So we know, for example, if we take WH movement, one of the prototypical cases of movement, that movement can apply in one of three ways. So, for example, we can move just the target WH phrase, as you see in 2A here. So that's the minimal target, which corresponds to the engine of the movement, the WH phrase, who. But we also can move a larger constituent, which comprises the target, plus other material, non-target material, which is lower or is seconded by the target, whose. And this is also called the whose picture type of piping. A third possibility is that you move a larger constituent, which this time has the target accompanied by other non-target material seconding the target, as in the pictures of whom type of piping that you see in 2C, for example. Now, in earlier work, which has been refined more recently, I argued that the 14 attested orders of out of the 24 potential ones of demonstrative, numerals, adjectives, and the noun can be derived without deriving the non-attested 10 orders of the same elements by moving in one of these three ways the head of the construction, namely the noun or the noun phrase, to start from the scope compliant order or hierarchy that you see in 3A, where the closest modifier is an adjective, then the next closest is the numeral phrase and the demonstrative phrase. And so, for example, if one were to target, to move just the target NP, one would cyclically move it around these modifiers up to the top of the spine, and to derive the order noun, dem, num, a that you see in 3B. If you move it in one of the two piping ways, namely the, now I should probably, well, I will scale it over. So to obtain the noun, adjective, numeral, demonstrative, with the other possibility that movement offers, namely the whose pictured by piping, you move the noun phrase in the first case vacuously with that kind of piping because there is nothing that is lower down. It overtakes the first modifier, but then it moves with the whose pictured by piping around the numeral phrase and then the demonstrative phrase. In the second piping case is where you move the noun phrase and dragging along modifiers that second the target. In this case, the first movement is the P and P, and then the num P and P. So here, the order is not reversed. So you get the third order, then moving. Now, this I should perhaps zoom back a little bit because it's too zoomed in. Let me see if I can do it. So you can see more things probably.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Yeah. This is not yet. Okay. Is it clear? Yeah. So these three orders are the bold ones in 4A, These are the most popular orders, as you see from the number of languages that are represented with this order, and the number of genera, which is even more telling, because that families of the Romance type, like Romance versus Germanic versus Slavic, and so on. And you see that the first one is even more represented than the second one. And then the less popular one is 4L, which has the noun demonstrative numeral A. The other the other 11 cases, the ones that are not in bold, can be derived by mixtures of either movement just of the target, noun or noun phrase, or a mixture of that plus one of the piping cases. Though the others are derived by these combinations. What is crucial is that given the restriction that you can move only constituents that contain the head of the construction, namely the noun or noun phrase, there is no way of deriving the orders in 5, which would have to be derived by moving directly an adjective without the noun, or a numeral without the noun, or a demonstrative without the noun. But this is not allowed. And so the rationale is that only the attested orders can be derived by this restriction. Now, if the principle that the head and only the head of a construction or a larger constituent that contains the head of the construction can move, and if that is correct, and if that is generalizable across the board to all constituents, to all projections, then we have a new type of evidence to establish the finer grained constituency in cases where there could be some doubt about the precise constituency. And I'll try now to show that. So if you consider first the orders that you find of a measure phrase, an adjective, and a noun, you see that there are only 4 out of 6 possible orders that are found cross-linguistically. For example, you have the more common English case in 6A or the Italian case in 6B, and the slightly less common case in 6C and D. But you never find cases where the noun is found between the adjective and the measure phrase. Now, if it's correct to say that measure phrase and the indisputable head of the whole constituent is the noun, and the arguable head of the sequence measure phrase adjective is the adjective, then given the restrictions and only heads can move, then you obtain the result that only 4 out of 6 orders are possible, because to obtain 6E and F, you would have to move the outside head inside another projection, which is not allowed. So the noun can only move around its modifier, which is the major phrase plus adjective, but cannot penetrate within it. And also the head of the AP, which contains the measure phrase, can move around and be before or after the measure phrase, but cannot host the noun, because it's outside of that projection. Now, this is also the case if you look at other three elements like the degree, adverb, adjective, and noun in 7. You find the same situation, namely only 4 orders are found cross-linguistically and not the 6th one that one could expect, like 7EF. Now, Greenberg actually had in his 63 article only 3 orders of degree, adverb, adjective, and noun, namely 7A with 11 languages, 7B with 8 languages, and 7C with 2 languages. But there is also 7D, which is found in with fewer languages, or here with 1 language. And once again, this is something that we expect if we again assume that the relevant heads are the noun for the whole constituent, and inside the degree adjective phrase, the head is the adjective. So that also is
Professor
allowed.
Cinque, Professor Cinque, sorry for interrupting you. Could you please make your screen bigger so the audience on YouTube can see your Microsoft Word screen?
Okay, let me try again. Is that better?
Yes, now is okay. Thank you so much.
All right, fine. So, of course, by rolling down in the footnotes, I give simply the examples that correspond to the cases that you see in 7A, B, C, or before in 6A, B, C, D. They are found here in the, so you have a 6-inch long pencil in English corresponding to, 6A. You have un uomo alto 2 metri in Italian corresponding to 6B, and so on for the other. This is the Bosnian, Čovek 2 metra visok, and I don't read the Chinese case, and the even less so the Sino-Tibetan languages. Now, this is a situation that is found, as I said, across the board, even if one considers the possibility that is found in many languages of pronouncing the common noun that corresponds to the proper name of a particular class. For example, in the case of adjectives, you find languages where when you have a color adjective, you can also pronounce the noun, the common noun color. If you had a size adjective, this is again Chinese, you can also have the common noun size accompanying the size adjective. Now I just limit here to the color adjective case. And what we find is that, once again, if you take the combination of an adjective of color, the noun color, and the noun, you only find 4 orders, not 6, which would be the expected factorial number of 3 elements that are combined together. And here again, I give some examples in footnotes. So in Bulgarian, you have the adjective of color, followed by the noun color, followed by the noun. In these oceanic languages, you have the mirror image. So noun, followed by color, followed by the adjective of color. But then in other languages, and these are again less common orders, you find noun followed by color, followed by noun color, And in Chinese, although it's kind of special, you also find the order color, adjective, color, noun. Now, something that can be added to the patterns that we saw in 6, 7, and 8 is that the first two, namely, I go back, in 6, A and B, in 7, A and B, and let me just stop here. The two heads, the ones that are in bold, move in unison, namely, they either move with the pictures of whom piping, the A case, or they move with the whose picture piping, the B cases. But you see that they either both follow their modifier, the A cases, or they precede their modifier. They move in unison together. And these are the most represented cases, the most frequent cases. The least frequent case seems to be the D case, where, because the C and D cases mix the two types of piping. Because if you look at, let's say, 6C, you have in the lower or more embedded phrase, measure phrase, adjective in the AP, you have movement of the pictures of whom piping, where the target is low, below the non-target material, the measure phrase. Whereas if you go up one step to the noun phrase, then here in 6C, you see that the noun has moved with the other type of piping by crossing over its modifier. And this seems to be less marked than the opposite. When you start by moving with the whose picture piping, which is, we know, is less marked than the pictures of whom piping, and then you switch to the more marked case. So I think one can also try to derive the frequency of certain orders by looking at the types of movements that have taken place. So this is the idea, and this is true for 7 and for 8 as well. Now, in these three cases that we have just seen, namely the ones that I simply recollected in 9, the generalization that only the head can move and not any other element by itself, like as we saw in the first case, numerals or adjectives cannot move except for focus reasons by themselves. So to obtain the canonical orders, you can only move the noun plus elements that are contained in constituents that contain the noun. Now here, for the three cases that we have seen, the generalization provided actually a kind of redundant information or indication of the correct constituencies, because we independently know that the head of the whole NP is the noun, and we know that the head of the AP arguably is the adjective. So here we have, with the idea that only these heads move, we simply confirmed an intuition that we had independently. However, now we will see a case or two cases where our intuitions fail, and where the generalization that only the heads can move will tell us which is the correct constituency for these elements. The fact that our intuitions fail in the orders, let me show you which ones, of numeral classifier noun or multiplier base noun. By multiplier base, I mean things like 300 books, where 3 is the multiplier, 100 is the base, is one of the bases in English, namely those that like 10, or 100, or 1,000. These are the bases of English. And in the case of numeral classifier noun, classifiers are nominalizer of the numeral phrase. I'll come back to that. Now, I said that here we don't have a very clear intuition as native speakers, certainly for the multiplier-based noun, but I will argue also for numeral classifier noun, even if the language is generally considered to be a non-classifier language, like English or Italian or Portuguese, say. I said we have no real intuition as witnessed by the conflicting proposals that you find in the literature. So, for example, for the sequence numeral classifier noun, you find Cheng Sibesma, Borer, Watanabe, and other people giving the structure that you see in 10a, where the classifier forms a constituent with a noun first, and then this constituent gets together with a numeral phrase and makes up a larger constituent. But you also find the opposite constituency given by Greenberg, who generally does not make mistakes, as one can see from Bailey. Wang, Fukui, and Takano, and others who have claimed that actually the classifier and the numeral make up a constituent, and that constituent is a modifier of the noun. So the classifier does not get together with the noun before getting together with the numeral. So it's the opposite. And for the other sequence, multiplier-based noun, again, you find conflicting evidence. So Yonin and Matushansky, in an article in their MIT book, they argue for the order that you see in 11a, where the base, let's say 100, gets together with the noun books before it composes with a multiplier 3. So as if you had 3 and then 100 books. Whereas other people like Kane and Hare and other linguists have claimed that 100 really makes a constituent with a multiplier, and then this multiplier and base constituent is together with a noun in a larger constituent. So like 300 on one side and books on the other side. Now, I think here that the generalization that only the head of any sub-projection, projection or sub-projection can move will actually make us choose the second of the two constituencies, like in B, where the classifier goes with the numeral, and the 11b, where the base goes with the multiplier rather than with the noun. Because otherwise, we would expect to find orders that we don't find. So now let's look at the orders that are actually attested across languages, first with the numeral classifier noun, and then with the multiplier-based noun. Let me say something which is actually in footnote 13. It's an aside which should be added because normally even typologists generally divide languages in numeral classifier languages and non-numeral classifier languages. The first class would be Chinese and many Southeast Asian languages. And then the non-classifier languages would be English, Italian, but even Slavic languages do have classifiers. And here I actually in an earlier work, I try to argue that even non-classifier languages in fact are classifiers, even if they have very few classifiers. And this we can tell by looking at the behavior of classifiers in obligatory classifier languages like Chinese or Thai or languages of that sort, where the noun the apparent noun time, in Italian would be volta, whatever in Portuguese, I don't know, 3 times, time, this kind of time, is, and other temporal nouns never come with the classifier, even though the language is an obligatory classifier language. This is already suspicious. And if you look at a language like Thai, which allows you to see where the noun sits and the classifier sits, because they sit in 2 different positions, opposite, divided by the numeral. So that in Thai you have the sequence, noun, numeral, classifier. And now you take a temporal noun like year or day or something, other measure of nouns. And then what you find is that you don't have what you would expect, the order year 1 classifier or year 2 classifier, as one finds in normal cases, but you only find 1 year where there is no classifier, but strangely enough, the noun now sits in the position of the classifier, not in the position of the noun, which should precede the numeral. So people have actually claimed that these are classifiers. They are not nouns, at least they are nouns that can be used as classifiers. Another thing to add is that, as shown by Sibesma, Cheng, and Sibesma, classifiers cannot be easily modified, although they look like nouns in most cases. They cannot be qualified by adjectives, except for 2 or 3, like small, big, which maybe are diminutives, augmentatives, or they're different things. So by putting together these 2 pieces of information, one can check now whether Italian or English uses volta, time, and other temporal nouns as nouns or as classifiers. And one way to tell is to try to modify them with adjectives. And what we find is that when we use volta, time, or day, or year as a measure, not as an argument or a predicate, then you cannot easily modify them with an adjective. So you see, under 1, you cannot say ci siamo incontrati solo 3 volte in Cresciose, or l'ho rivisto 2 giorni disponibili fa. Notice that if giorni or anni, which can also be used as normal nouns, are found in argument position, then of course you can modify them. You can say something like, questi sono I soli 2 giorni disponibili. That's completely fine, as opposed to 1B. Or ha passato 2 anni tremendi in prigione, or whatever, as opposed to 1C. Actually, there is a mistake there. So clearly, it seems that the classifiers are also found in so-called non-classifier languages. Now, let's go and look at the actual orders of numeral, classifier, and noun. And what you find is that you actually have the order numeral, classifier, noun, or noun, classifier, numeral, or noun, numeral, classifier, or classifier, numeral, noun, but not E and F, 12E and F. Now, this follows if we take the noun, as we have seen, to be ahead of the bigger constituent, and if we take the classifier, as actually Greenberg had actually proposed, as the head of the constituent made out of the numeral plus the classifier. Because here then, you see that in 12A, the 2 heads again have moved in unison. They remained with the pictures of whom piping at the end. Whereas in 12B, they again moved in unison, but this time with the whose picture piping, moving them across their respective modifiers. And the C and D are the mixed cases where some, I mean, especially the D case is actually very, very rare. As in fact, Greenberg did not even mention this possibility with them. Again, the same thing is with multiplier and base, where 13A and B, you see that the two heads, the noun and the base, move in unison with the pictures of piping without taking over their modifier. Whereas if the base is the head, like Kane and other people have claimed, here it again is in unison with the movement of the noun. So both cross over their respective modifier. And C and D are the mixed cases. But crucially, again, you don't find ever the possibility in 13E and F. And notice that nothing would stop finding such orders if we started out with the structure that in 11A and 10A, because if the noun and the base are two heads, nothing would stop the noun crossing over the base in between the multiplier and the base, for example. Or in the case of 10A, nothing would seem to stop the possibility of moving the noun up in between numeral and classifier, but you never find them. So, and that follows simply by the type of constituency that, how am I doing with time? Because now there is one interesting case. I'll try to go a bit quicker. Considering another slightly more complex case given by the order of demonstrative reinforcer and noun. Now here, the word order facts again provide evidence for a particular constituency where the demonstrative and the demonstrative reinforcer, something like what you see in 14A, these here three tall guys, where again, we don't immediately have an intuition about what is the structure there. Does here belong to the same constituent as these, or does it belong to a constituent lower down the spine? We don't have a clear, but again, actually, one very interesting piece of evidence is, as discussed by Bruget, is given by Bosnian and Serbo-Croatian, a particular property of that language, namely the second position clitic restriction, which allows, or actually forces a clitic to be in second position after one constituent. So in 14b, you see that there is a clitic which is in between even the larger constituent. So that there, to me, book give that book to me. And here, this possibility alternates with the one found in footnote 23, where the clitic actually follows the entire constituent, that their book. And in Croatian, Serbo-Croatian, and Bosnian, we know that left branch extractions are possible from DPs, so that if we go back to here, onu tamo is actually a constituent which has been extracted from the DP. But now, crucially, Bruget shows that, let me see if I have it here, that the examples in 2, in footnote, onu novum is impossible, namely where the sequence demonstrative adjective precedes the clitic. So that shows that demonstrative and the adjective does not form a constituent that can fill the first position, after which the second position clitic can be found. And only in here, on utamo is actually functions as a constituent. So we have independent evidence here that this is a constituent. And concerning which one is the head, it's probably the reinforcer. If one thinks of Keynes' work concerning the silent noun place, which would actually follow the reinforcer, so that the actual head would be the demonstrative reinforcer plus the silent noun place. And here again, you find 4 out of 6 possibilities, but you also find more possibilities. So you find, I go quickly through the various cases. Demonstrative is the 14 cases, so you have this here, or utamo. Then you find the other possibility in the mirror image Malayo-Polynesian language in 15, and you find the mixed cases of movements in 16 and 17. But you also here, you find more options, which at first might look problematic because you even find the noun coming in between the demonstrative and the demonstrative reinforcer, like in Italian or French, in something like questi due gattini neri qui, where you would start out with questi qui due gattini neri. But then the plausible derivation is, given that qui, the reinforcer, is the head of the construction, it moves out. And like we saw in Bosnian creation, and then remnant movement of the whole remnant would make up that particular order. So, I mean, this is more complex, and I leave it as a tentative conclusion, but I think that this is also one case. Now, given what we have seen, we should also consider the fact that I put it back to a less zoomed because otherwise you don't see the, okay, here. We are often assume, or we often think of a projection as being made by a spine which is downward and rightward, as you see in 3b, for a more complex, phrase like these here 200, 2 shades, 2 red lipsticks, where this here we saw it's a constituent, but 200 also is a constituent. 2 shades is a constituent, modifying now the degree adverb to, and then the adjective and the noun. So the actual structure would have to be different, much more articulated, where you see that the constituent made up by the demonstrative and the demonstrative reinforcer is branching off, so to speak, to the left. And so is the classifier phrase, which contains the numeral P, which contains the multiplier plus base. And I have not discussed about additive numerals, which can also appear together with multiplier plus base when you say 253. Now there are languages where you put the additive before and or after with more possibilities. And then the most downward, leftward branching case is the adjective case, where you see that you have the numeral P, where I didn't put the multiplier base, but then you have measure, then you have the degree, then you have the adjective of color and color, where it's a noun color that actually, or the noun phrase color that actually modifies the noun phrase lipstick rather than the adjective phrase itself. Now, this more precise, I think, hierarchical structure that we can reach in this way by applying what we saw, the generalization being that only the head can move and by itself or within a larger constituent in one of the ways that is allowed by the pipe piping, this will in turn permit a more restrictive theory of word order variation. And consider, for example, the following fact. The factorial numbers stemming from the combination of n elements can be drastically reduced if we know the actual constituency in which the n elements come, because then by the restriction that we saw that you can only move the head of each projection, then you will cut down the possibilities of combinations. So if you consider the addition of a fifth element to the four elements that I started out with, namely demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun. Now let's add classifier, which was the head of the classifier phrase containing the numeral we saw. Now, assuming that you have only 14 orders of the four elements, demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun, and we add this new element, which is the head of a constituent containing the numeral, then we know that it will only be preceding or following the noun, the numeral. So we only have to multiply 14 by 2, which makes 28. Now notice that factorial 5 is actually 120. So if there were no restriction on what orders you could obtain, then you would expect to find 120 combinations of elements of demonstrative, numeral, adjective, noun, classifier. But if you take the constituency, which we saw, then you only have 28 possibilities to expect. And this actually is what we find. Let me show you. So in 20, you actually see 28 possibilities, only 2 out of which I have not been able to find examples, but there should be. So it's a question, but if you look at now here, they are just the same orders that are expected by Greenberg's universal 20, namely the 14 orders, plus multiplied by 2, namely, if you look at 20A and A prime, the only difference is where the classifier comes, either after the numeral or before the numeral, because that's inside the constituent made up by the numeral and classifier. So if the head is the classifier, it can only move in the 2 ways that we know. And so you only get 28. Now, adding a 6th element, let's say a complex numeral phrase made up of a multiplier and base, that would yield factorial 6, 720 combinations, possibilities. But if we keep to the constituency that we have seen, where multiplier and base form a constituent, where classifier and numeral form a constituent, then the combinations are drastically reduced. Now we have only to multiply 28 by 2, because now the base can either precede the multiplier or follow the multiplier, cannot be found anywhere else. And so in the order that you see here, if you substitute num by multiplier and base, you will have all the combinations, but only the double number of 28. So you get 56 rather than 720 possible combinations. So I think that this seems to show that once you have a clear understanding of the constituency of a big phrase like the nominal phrase or an aspect of the nominal phrase, and you have the restriction that only the heads of these constituent can move within their subprojections, then the possible combinations of orders are drastically limited. So it seems that the generalization that we saw, whereby the cross-linguistic word order variation allowed us to find some evidence for for cases that we did not have a clear intuition about the constituency. At the same time, in turn, it seems that once we have this constituency reached, so discovered by this restriction on the movements that are allowed, then we can also formulate a more restrictive theory of word order variation, which can make predictions on what orders are actually expected to be found. And I think this is a way in which cartography and the classical problem of linearization, linear order, can help each other in restricting the theory. Okay, I'll stop here.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Guglielmo, for this very illuminating talk. I am sure our audience have enjoyed hearing these fresh ideas on linearization and cartography. So now we are going to read some of the questions we have received from our audience. If you have any question, please just click on the address we are sharing on the chat. So there is a comment. The participant Eli at the YouTube chat has posted the following comment. To me, as an Italian native speaker, it would be much more acceptable to have the adjective in the pronominal position in this case.
In the prenominal.
In the prenominal, yes, sorry.
Right.
Ci siamo incontrati solo 3 orribili volte.
Yeah, this is true to the extent that, for example, in English, we find the same thing. And this might have to do with the fact, now, suppose that the structure, as I gave it earlier, is with the classifier containing, the classifier P containing the numeral P, and the adjectives, which actually come in two different classes, the direct modification and the ones that derive from relative clauses, reduced relative clauses. These adjectives normally are, especially those that derive from reduced relative clauses, can occur in the post-nominal position. So we are pretty sure that these are the ones that correspond to the real class of adjectives in contrastive interpretation and so on. Now, there is a possibility, a marked possibility for the other type of adjectives to even precede the numeral. So you can say in English, it's marked. Those, for example, I spent a beautiful 2 weeks in Hawaii, where an adjective precedes actually the numeral with a special interpretation. Now, it seems to me that even putting the adjectives before volta or the other classifiers, they are still kind of marked. And I would assume that they belong to this special marked case of having some adjectives preceding even the classifier P, because clearly if the classifier is higher than the prototypical adjectives, you cannot easily have them, following the numeral. That's my hunch that I have. Okay, but that's an interesting, because I had the same point from some English native speakers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Guglielmo. The first comment, this comment, has been done by Elisa Culiana from the University Ca' Foscari, our university.
Right. Yeah. Actually, she is now in Czechia, I think.
Nice, nice. We have, Guglielmo, one more question. So, the participant Ang Sin Su from the YouTube chat has posted the following comment. Actually, about the claim that the classifier cannot go with the adjective in Chinese, her and CA 2010 have provided an adjustment for this test for classifiers. This is because as Chinese natives, we can have an adjective inserted between the numeral and the classifier, which give us the order numeral, adjective, classifier, noun.
Right.
But only limited adjectives can go in this position.
Right. Actually, there is one article, I don't remember now the author, which gave examples of adjectives coming in between the numeral and the classifier in Chinese, but they seem to belong to a small class of type of adjectives. I also asked some native speakers. Apparently, they like adjectives like small and big better than other types of adjectives. So that I don't know. But the question is that at least Cheng and Sibesma, and one of them is a native speaker of, I guess, Cantonese, not Mandarin, but so they claim that they are very, very few and very special kind of adjectives. In fact, I know that it's not only big and small, there are a few others, but one can probably suspect that in the case of big and few, it will be big and small, or that they are more diminutive and augmentative rather than the real adjectives. I don't know. That remains to be seen because augmentatives and diminutives also appear to be in a different position than the corresponding size adjectives. They can co-occur even with size adjectives. So that would have to be looked at into more. Anyway, I know it's a problem, but at least it's I mean, a very kind of limited type of adjectives that can actually appear there. So there should be other more stringent tests to tell when something is used as a classifier. When a noun is used as a classifier, Greenberg had no doubt about the fact that in the measure interpretation, time in English, but also year, even kilo, other measures, even money, you find numeral classifier languages which have classifier everywhere, but they don't have it with money or with, you know, measures of like kilometer with, or temporal nouns. So that seems to be a very strong indication that under the measure interpretation, these nouns are actually classifiers rather than real nouns. So I don't know.
Thank you, Guglielmo. The students at Unicamp's Cartographic Syntax Laboratory, La Casa, have sent the following comment through private message. On par with the comment made by Ung Sin Su, we at La Casa are under the impression that the same happens in Korean regarding classifiers.
Well, it may well be. I mean, Chinese, although it's generally taken to be a VO language because the object follows the verb, has most properties that make it similar to Japanese and Korean. Almost all other properties from the position of relative clauses, the position of the proper, the first name and first name and surname. So they would say not Achilles Tescari, but Tescari Achilles. And you know, all the mirror image that you find in between, let's say, Japanese and Malagasy, or Japanese and Italian to the extent, but Italian is not a very, or English, they are not very head initial languages, they are head medial. And so they have combinations of properties. And Portuguese is the same.
Yeah.
So you have, you know, demonstrative numerals that precede the noun and adjectives that either precede or follow. Whereas in real head initial languages, everything follows the noun. So the most typical, as we saw earlier, the number of languages is with the order noun, adjective, numeral, demonstrative, the pure mirror image of English.
Okay.
So again, one has to be careful about, you know, using some terminology like head initial and final, right?
Okay. Thank you, Guglielmo. Guglielmo, I have a question.
Sure.
As far as the token in 5 is concerned, the one featuring the orders of color adjective and color noun in 8b from Newian and Oceanic language, I guess, the order is noun, color, an adjective of color, a color adjective, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Right. One example is given in footnote 10.
Okay.
House color blue, right?
Yeah. Well, 6b, I guess, is possible in my Brazilian Portuguese with the color noun pronounced. So, if one finds things like an outfit color blue, uma roupa cor azul, an outfit color blue. This is the order in Brazilian Portuguese, okay? Which means a blue color outfit. There is an interesting fact on agreement in Brazilian Portuguese. So if one wanna say something like a red car, they can indeed say in Brazilian Portuguese, a car color, in this case pronounced the word color, red. Carro cor vermelha. A car color red.
And
It's
the
better.
agreement, sorry,
Yeah, the agreement fact, this is very interesting because it's better for the adjective red to agree in gender, in this case feminine, with the pronounced name color, which is in feminine, right?
Right.
So my final question is, my question is, does the agerhead, I mean the ager because I've read your the first version of your book, so does that agerhead you put on top of each sub-projection play a role in this case?
Right. Yeah, that's actually the same which is found in Italian, because if you take a feminine noun like una macchina,
okay,
and you pronounce color, you actually see the agreement with. So you say una macchina rossa, feminine, but then but you say una macchina di color rosso, not rossa. Okay. So again, it agrees with the noun, I mean, with the closer noun rather than with the head of the whole. And actually, this is kind of expected, I would say, because the adjective Well, that's a complex question because it has to do with other cases of mismatch agreement between, take for example, La città di New York. You can say the city, New York City or New York. So the common noun can be pronounced or not. But then I think in German, there are some mismatches of, let me see, maybe even in Italian, if you say, one city which is masculine is Il Cairo. So you say La città del Cairo.
Yeah.
Now let me see what happens if you add some modification that would agree with with either one. It's complicated because I think you can say Il Cairo, which clearly is masculine because of the article, il. But you can also say Il Cairo è il... I don't know what the intuitions are. If you add è una città rumorosa, of course you agree with città. But I don't think you can say Il Cairo è rumorosa. But not even Il Cairo è rumoroso. I don't know what the other Italian native speakers think about.
Il Cairo è rumoroso.
Non si può dire.
Can you say it's better than Il Cairo è rumorosa, I guess. It's not entirely clear.
La Caira, ti verrebbe da
So I mean, there is I remember the case in Latin, which I cannot recollect now, in which, depending on whether the common noun is pronounced or not, you have agreement with a different type of agreement. So it seems that if you pronounce the common noun, then agreement goes with the common noun. If you drop the common noun, then possibly the other noun overtakes. But it's a complex matter that has to be looked into in different languages. Whether, you know, because many common nouns simply are silent. So when you say the river Mississippi, or you say the Mississippi.
Yeah.
So both, you know, but then the problem arises when the common noun has a gender which is different from that of the proper noun or the proper name. That is the case to be looked into. And I don't think there is much.
Yeah, there are more questions. Thank you. We have, Guglielmo, a comment from the participant Gitana Brito Bezerra from the Federal University of Santa Catarina. She sent us the following question. I was told by a native speaker of English that 1.5 hours sounds more natural than 1 hour and a half. Is that in line with your proposal? And in case you need, we have a native speaker in the room.
Right. 1.5 hour or 1 hour and a half?
Yeah. 1.5 hours and 1 hour and a half.
Yeah, I guess both are possible. I don't know which one is preferred, but this seems to correspond to two actual structures that you find with additive numerals. Namely, some people have claimed when you say 22, you are actually 22 books. let's say, you are actually saying 20 books and 2 books, where you delete the first books. But then, and this might be true, not in this particular case, for certain languages and certain constructions, but not always. Because take, for example, Italian, where when you have one, uno or una, so take, for example, le 1001 notte. Clearly here, you must have this kind of structure, where you have le 1000 notti, silent notti, and una notte. But you can also say le 1001 notti, or le 101 notti, where if you not le 101 notte, maybe you can also have the 101 notte, I don't know. But certainly there are 2 structures of additive numerals, and half could be one such case, where when you say an hour and a half, probably is an hour and a half hour. Whereas when you say 1.5 hour, you don't have double hour, so to speak. I don't know. I mean, this has to be looked into.
Okay. Let me see if there now, if someone from La Casa and from Meg here in the Zoom room wanna ask a question to Guglielmo, please just open their camera and turn on their microphone. You can ask him directly.
Okay. I take out, I guess, the...
Achilles, may I about the 1.5 hours
Yeah,
question?
of course.
I was under the impression that the person who asked it actually meant what would be 1:30 in the afternoon in Brazilian Portuguese. So when telling the time, this native person that she talked with would prefer 1.5 hours, as in what time is it? It's 1.5 hours. I can understand that. And I see how 1.5 hours would be very strange in that context. There is a native speaker, Michaela Van, at the YouTube chat who says she disagrees with that native speaker, not me, the one who talked to Gitana at UFSC. She says 1.5 hours or 1.5 hours is her preference, but I'm not sure she was taking into consideration that the person was probably referring to when telling the time. So she says that she agrees with me, Michaela Van now, and it really depends on the context. So I guess that would answer the question.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting.
Sorry if I may add something. I'm Gitana, so
Oh,
yeah,
hi.
hi. So the context actually was something like, okay, I live 1.5 hours away from the ocean, for example. It was not in response to what time is it or something like that.
Okay, so I live 1.5 hours away from the ocean. Sounds really weird. What do you think,
Yes.
Michaela Van?
I agree with you, but yeah, that's why I was surprised when this native speaker told me that.
Okay, well, I think it really depends on the context.
But even in this context, it sounds weird, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Let's say I live 1.5 hours away from the ocean is more acceptable. Okay, that will for me at least.
Yeah, for me too.
Okay.
And I'm not a native speaker of English, so that's why I was questioning myself.
Yeah, the question is whether there is a silent hour following half. 1 hour and a half hour. You know, hour and classifier elements most often are, or functional nouns, are most often silent. So if you take Italian, for example, I accept things like, at what time should we meet? And I can say, alle una. Now notice that this is very strange because you have at the feminine plural and una, which is feminine singular, alle una. But certainly there is something like alle ore, una ora.
I see.
You see what I mean? I don't know in Portuguese whether you have something similar or. So many of these functional, I mean, Kane has worked a lot on this also about alle una. And I think he's completely right in claiming that, you know, a typical behavior of functional classifier nouns are that they can be left out.
I
Like,
see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the discussion.
Any more questions from our room here, the Zoom room? If not, I have a small clarification question, Guglielmo. Just say one small clarification. On the derivation of two shades of lipsticks, we have, of course, more structure on page 10 of your handout. A detail is not clear to me. Would the derivation start with the merge of the NP lipsticks, or should it start with the merge of the numeral 2 and the measure phrase shades? I didn't get that.
You mean page 10, did you say?
Page 10, yeah, the derivation to, yeah.
How you build up the structure, is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that remains something to, I mean, Chomsky would have, you know, merger of elements at different workspaces and then put them together. Now, the question is, do you start with, I guess, it would also be a question of the depth of embedding. So you would first combine together measure P, and then that would be combined with the degree. And then degree P would be combined with AP, with A color and make up AP and then color. And then NP color and NP would be combined together. So it's really a kind of embedding of, I mean, this remains, this is a technical and theoretical question, how merge is actually, I here, as you have seen, I have not followed really the labeling type of analysis that is most, you know, popular in minimalist. I guess it can be retranslated into something like that once, you know, the problem is to put together two phrases, what happens, because they cannot be merged together and label. It's a question of what can label what.
Yeah.
And if you put two NPs together, either they have the same feature so that the feature labels the combination of the two, but in here actually it's almost the case that everything, well, not really everything, but many things are really nominal in the nominal extended projection, because a classifier typically is nominal. The adjectives, if they modify a function, a common noun like color, size, provenance, whatever, then they are also nominal. Degree and measure is not so clear. Measure can be nominal because you have a shade, but you can have, you know, centimeter. What is a centimeter? It's a noun. The most difficult part is degree, but maybe even degree can be nominal to a certain extent. I don't know. If that were the case, certainly for the numeral, bases are typically nominal, especially high cases like bases like 100 and 1,000. These are really nouns. And Kane actually has always thought that even minimal numerals are modifiers of a silent number. So that number or amount would also be nominal. We know that classifiers are mostly nominal elements that serve a particular function of nominalizing again. Again, if Kane is right in the demonstrative reinforcer case and demonstratives, you have a silent noun place. So that is this here place or something like that. So it looks as if everything that modifies the noun, the head noun in the nominal extended projection is nominal, in which case this would render the possibility of labeling a la Chomsky even possible. I don't know. I mean, that remains to be seen.
Okay. Okay, we are almost out of time. Dear Guglielmo, dear colleagues and audience here in Brazil, it's time to have lunch, and it's also probably time to have dinner in Venice, or at least to drink a spritz. To drink a spritz. So,
right.
a spritz.
You remember.
Yeah, I remember, of course, in Campo Santa Margherita, Guglielmo.
Right.
Yeah. So, Chin Chin.
And Sandra does too.
Sandra does too, yeah. Sandra, would you like to say something to our audience at this time so we can wrap up?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Professor Cinque, for having accepted our invitation and for your thoughts-provoking conference. I would like to thank the audience in Brazil and abroad for being here with us today. Next month, we will be receiving another guest. The date and the details will be announced soon in this channel and on social media. So stay tuned. Thank you very much and see you next month. Thank you very much, Professor Cinque. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guglielmo.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Stay well. Okay.
Stay well, Guglielmo.
Thank you. Let me see. Stop.